Welcome to the BEASTwriter podcast. I am your host, Ryan Sakamoto, and today we're going to be discussing the future of San Francisco 49ers defensive coordinator Robert Saleh. So let's get started. For those who don't know or have recently followed my podcast, I like to break down any of my podcasts into three parameters. First is who the players or coaches involved. The second is why the move was made. And the third, but not least parameter, is the instant gratification versus long-term gains. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the coach. In this case, it's defensive coordinator Robert Saleh. Well, Robert Saleh is in line to be a next head coaching candidate and the top candidate at the end of the year. He was a hot commodity last year in the 49ers Super Bowl run. Ultimately didn't land the job, came back to San Francisco this year. He is now resurfacing among NFL teams who are looking for a head coach, and the most recent is the Detroit Lions. Now, there's a lot of ties, and if you connect the dots, that go hand in hand with Robert Saleh tying him to Michigan. I'll get into that later in this podcast, but let's go ahead and talk about Robert Saleh. All right, so Saleh is ultimately going to land a job somewhere, get promoted somewhere as a head coach at the end of the season. All right, so that leaves a gaping hole at the defensive coordinator position. And if you remember, the 49ers lost Joe Woods, which is the passing game coordinator last year. That was a huge loss, as we see this year. They're ultimately going to lose another defensive coach, the big one in charge, Robert Saleh. So who's going to be the next in line to replace him? That's the big question. And if you're looking at 2021, I'm looking at it from a standpoint of in the mind of Kyle Shanahan, because Kyle Shanahan is the one that picks the staff. GM John Lynch ultimately is the one that hires it, but it's Kyle Shanahan is the man responsible for really making that decision to see what's best for his team moving forward. And if you're asking me, I believe that guy is going to be Dan Quinn, who was the recently fired head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. All right, so let's go back and now talk about Dan Quinn. Who is Dan Quinn? Well, Dan Quinn was a former defensive quality control coach for the San Francisco 49ers from 2001 to 2004. He then was promoted to the defensive line coach from 2003 to 2004, bounced around the league, jumping from the Miami Dolphins, the New York Jets, and then ultimately landing and staying put with the Seattle Seahawks, worked his way up to become the defensive coordinator, boasting the Legion of Boom during Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, the glory days over there, and then moved on and got a head coaching gig with the Atlanta Falcons from 2015 to 2020 before being fired midway earlier this year. All right, now how does that play into the 49ers' favor? Well, again, Robert Saleh is off to Detroit, in my opinion. I'm calling it now. I think a lot of people are calling that. I don't think it'd be a surprise to anyone. He's off to the Detroit Lions, and they're going to need a new defense coordinator. Again, Kyle Shanahan wants someone he's familiar with. So I like connecting the dots, and here's what I see happening as 2021 plays out. All right. When Dan Quinn became the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, his first job and his first task of business was to hire an offensive coordinator that he can work with. That guy was Kyle Shanahan. Those two married each other, and they ultimately went to the Super Bowl, sort of won the Super Bowl, beating the New England Patriots. Ultimately didn't happen. We all know how that played out. One of the best comebacks in Super Bowl history by Tom Brady, the greatest ever. And now that's on Kyle Shanahan's resume as one of the biggest losses in Super Bowl history. All right, but with that being said, he hired offensive coordinator Kyle Shanahan. Dan Quinn really believed in Kyle Shanahan and what he brought to the table. I think Shanahan has the same amount of respect for Dan Quinn. And now that the tables have turned, I believe Kyle Shanahan is going to return the favor. And in doing so, he's going to hire Dan Quinn to be Robert Saleh's successor. And again, it goes back to which coach he feels more comfortable with. And he already worked with and has a rapport with Dan Quinn with his time with the Atlanta Falcons. He also has ties with the San Francisco 49ers from his time earlier in his coaching career, got his break in the NFL from the 49ers. So I actually remember watching Dan Quinn on the sidelines. My family had front row season tickets on the 20-yard line in section 14, row A. So I really got a close-up look, even when I was a kid growing up, on what Dan Quinn offered to his defensive line. Spoke to Dan Quinn and Bryant Young during his playing days, and Bryant Young really had nice things to say about Dan Quinn. So anything that comes from Bryant Young is pretty good, high praise, right? And we see it when he moved on to Seattle, brought down the Legion of Boom, and the rest was history. All right. So why Dan Quinn, right? Well, again, I'm connecting the dots, but then it goes further than that, right? There's no, how do I say this? There's no drop off in scheme when you look at it, right? So when you move on from Robert Saleh to Dan Quinn, you're keeping the same scheme intact. Usually, when you move on from one coordinator to the next, you're usually getting new players because you need players that fit your scheme. And then you also have to find coaches that understand that scheme in order to coach up those proper techniques that you're trying to put on display on Sundays. Well, with Robert Saleh out and Dan Quinn in, everything's the same. You still have the hawk tackling techniques that they preach. You still have the schemes that they preach. You still have the techniques that they preach at cover 3, cover 1. Ultimately, they like to keep everything in front, so they'll give up the dinky dog passes, 4 to 5 yard slants, quick passes, let quarterbacks make the mistake, and then capitalize on those mistakes with turnovers. So, in a sense, it's a seamless transition for Dan Quinn becoming the 49ers' next defensive coordinator, and which is why I think Kyle Shanahan really wants Dan Quinn. I think it's a no-brainer option. I know a lot of people have been rumored to possibly tie Dan Quinn to the 49ers, and that's a big reason why. Now, let's take it a step further, all right? So, Dan Quinn and Robert Saleh both come from the Gus Bradley tree. Gus Bradley hails from the Seattle Seahawks. And when you have that, it marries, again, the schemes together. So it's a perfect fit and what I can see happening. Ultimately, I'd be shocked if it was any other defensive coordinator other than Dan Quinn for the San Francisco 49ers next year. I would be shocked. It would be the most craziest thing ever because he is the ideal person for that scheme. His resume speaks for itself. He won Super Bowls with the Seattle Seahawks as the defensive coordinator. I'm sure Richard Sherman has high praise for him, even though he may not return next year, as he alluded to earlier in some interviews. With that being said, I can all but guarantee that Dan Quinn will be the next defensive coordinator of the 49ers. At least that's what I'm hoping for because, again, it's a seamless transition and it's a match made in heaven. All right, now let's peel back another layer of the onion, so to speak, all right? So you hire Dan Quinn. Well, with Dan Quinn comes what? His own set of coaches. Because if Robert Saleh is out, he's going to want to bring some of his coaches. And I know with the CBA, it's kind of hard to do that. But, if there's an agreement that, hey, you can bring over some players and some coaches, why not do it? Players being Kerry Hyder Jr. What if Kerry Hyder Jr., he's not going to be signed by the San Francisco 49ers or it's going to be unable to sign him because the 49ers have 25 plus unrestricted free agents. He's due for a big payday in a contract year, so he might follow Robert Saleh to the Detroit Lions. And then with that comes coaches, right? The coaching staff, the current coaching staff with the 49ers. So Robert Saleh has his own positional coaches. Well, what if those positional coaches want to join Saleh somewhere else? What if one of them becomes a defensive coordinator that's a positional coach right now? Just saying. Robert Quinn. Dan Quinn will want his own coaches, and I firmly believe there's going to be some coach shakeups as you look at the NFL trends around the NFL. And one coach that I tweeted out, if you followed me on Twitter, I tweeted out, and you can check the Twitter receipts, last year, once Joe Woods, who I just mentioned earlier, left the San Francisco 49ers to be with the Cleveland Browns, he left a gaping hole in the secondary. And I thought Chris Richard would be that guy. Well, Chris Richard is not that guy. Chris Richard, for those who don't know, he was a former 49ers player. He was a Seahawks defensive coordinator from 2010 to 2014. He was a defensive backs coach for 2010 to 2014 before becoming the defensive coordinator, being Dan Quinn's successor in 2015 to 2017, and then ultimately being fired and then hired by Cowboys Jason Garrett to be their defensive back coach from 2018 to 2019, then was fired, which then led me to believe that he would be picked up by the 49ers because Joe Woods left for the Cleveland Browns. I thought Chris Richard would be a perfect ideal fit for the scheme and what they like to do there, so I thought they would roll in him. He ultimately didn't get the job, and he is now an unrestricted free agent as Mike McCarthy hired his guy. All right, so he's still on the chopping block right now looking for a job. Don't be surprised if Dan Quinn brings over Chris Richard, who has ties with him with the Seattle Seahawks. All right, that's the secondary coach that I have for the San Francisco 49ers next year. Take it or leave it. That's what I think. Then you have to look at Travis Jones. He is the defensive line coach for the Atlanta Falcons right now. He was hired by Dan Quinn. anytime a new GM, a new head coach come into play, they want to hire their own coaching staff. That's just the way it is. Not many coaches from the previous regime stay over. Again, I just point out Jason Garrett, right? Chris Richard was part of that collateral damage. You wipe out the whole coaching staff. The new coach wants to bring in his own set of guys. Same concepts will take place, because even though it's not the head coaching that's going to be replaced if Raheem Morris doesn't get the job, or if he stays on the job, there's going to be other business coaches that are going to be like, hey, can I move on with Dan Quinn over in San Francisco? Those conversations are going to take place. Let me tell you, they are. They're going to take place. And Travis Jones is a guy who I can see Dan Quinn bringing over. Now, I know the 49ers already have Chris K, right? Coach K. I like to call him Coach K. With Coach K there, he's doing a tremendous job. And it reminds me of the time when Tom Rathman was the running backs coach in San Francisco for so many years, right? Under John Harbaugh, under the different regimes, Jim Tomsula, the list goes, Chip Kelly, the list goes on and on and on. Tom Rathman was a great running backs coach, but ultimately Mike Shanahan, I'm getting guys mixed up. Kyle Shanahan wanted his guy. So he brought in his running back coach, right? A guy he's familiar with. And Tom Rathman is now off to, I believe it was the Indianapolis Colts, right? I think that's where he's at right now. I have to double check on that, but I believe he's with the Colts. And wherever he's at, whether, like I said, whether it's Colts or somewhere else, he's coaching somewhere else. I forgot, but I think it's the Colts. He's a well-respected coach. I mean, Frank Gore loved him, and anything that comes out of Frank Gore's mouth, if he's is high praise, and you have to consider that. But ultimately, Kyle Shanahan wanted his guy. He went with someone else. Okay, cool. Same kind of idea here in San Francisco. Coach K, great defensive line coach. But then when you have Travis Jones, a coach that Dan Quinn's familiar with, will he bring him over? I mean, or try to pry him away from Atlanta Falcons? You still got to have those discussions, right? You can't just bring someone over and do a clean sweep. The reason I say it might be a clean sweep is because, again, the Atlanta Falcons management system is in total turmoil. Thomas Dimitroff is out, the general manager. Dan Quinn's obviously out. So if Raheem Morris is the head coach, or even if he isn't the head coach, those conversations are going to take place, because of course Raheem Morris wants his guys too. And ultimately he came over not in the initial Dan Quinn phase when the Atlanta Falcons were being built up by his squad back in 2015. Okay, so look for that to happen. The NFL stands for not for long, and that's the reason why. It's all about networking power. It's not what you know, it's all about who you know, and how familiar you are with the coach and what makes the most sense for your team. Okay, then that brings me over to someone else. All right, this name you might be oddly familiar with. He was one of my favorite players growing up watching as I drink my coffee, and that player is Jeff Ulbrich. Jeff Ulbrich came out of the University of Hawaii. He was a third-round pick by the San Francisco 49ers back in 2000. I memorized that draft like it was no other, because back in 1999 is when I actually started covering the NFL draft religiously. 2000 was really my year where I really hit it on and took on that next step. I don't know how many draft picks I'm going off the top of my head. I don't know, probably 11 draft picks. It was when Bill Walsh drafted Giovanni Carmazzi out of Hofstra, also in the third round. He also drafted the likes of Julian Peterson, traded down with the Washington Redskins at the time, traded down, and they landed Julian Peterson, Ahmed Plummer, Jason Webster, John Engelberger, Chike O'Keefer, I believe John Milam in the later rounds. They also got Paul Smith, I believe his name, Paul Smith, a special teams ace out of UTEP, if I'm not mistaken, was a fullback, running back hybrid. Again, I totally remember this draft like the back of my hand, because it was one of those drafts I was like, oh my gosh, like these players were actually pretty good. Who else came in at 2000 NFL draft? Yeah, that was like 7 players right there. I believe John Keith was another player. He was a strong safety out of Furman, I believe. There's a lot of players that really made an impact from that 2000 NFL draft class, and it was one of my favorite draft classes just because they hit on so many picks. I believe Brian Jennings came out of that draft class. I don't know. If I'm getting all these right, that's crazy. Because like I said, it was one of my favorite drafts. But anyways, getting back to Jeff Ulbrich. Jeff Ulbrich, again, was a former player. He ultimately, like I said, was a special teams ace and then broke into the starting lineup, played for Dan Quinn. He was a special teams player along with Terry Jackson, Michael Robinson of NFL Network, and so forth. He was hired by Dan Quinn to be ultimately his linebackers coach. And if Jeff Ulbrich is out with the Atlanta Falcons because we don't know if Raheem Morris wants to keep him or if Raheem Morris has his own guy, Jeff Ulbrich's now on the chopping block. He's now looking for a new job. Well, Dan Quinn's going to be defensive coordinator. He's going to want to bring Jeff Ulbrich. Trust me. He's smart. He's savvy. He knows his stuff. Great special teams ace. One of the things that I liked about Jeff Ulbrich growing up, and I would read in the Mercury News all the time, because obviously there was no internet back then, or there was internet, but it was kind of like, yeah, blogging wasn't a thing, or vlogging like I'm doing wasn't a thing right there. So I would always read the newspaper, read Tim Kawakami read some quotes that, some of these Lowell Cohn would put, some of these other things that some of these beat writers would put out there, and columnists would put out there. And one thing that I saw was they always talked about Jeff Ulbrich's ability to be a film junkie, right? He was always in the film room, always studying film, very smart, very savvy, may not have the most athletically gifted skill set, but he was able to get things done, be a tackling machine because he was so smart. That's the type of presence that Jeff Ulbrich brings to the coaching position if he becomes a head coach, or sorry, not the head coach, if he becomes the linebackers coach of the San Francisco 49ers. We're seeing it with Atlanta Falcons, what he's doing with Deion Jones and the years that he's been having. So you really take that into account. Jeff Ulbrich is a stud. I like him. San Jose native. Really like Jeff Ulbrich, and I think he would be a nice upgrade to the linebacker position. Although DeMeco Ryans is doing a pretty damn good job. Again, it goes with the coach, Who does Dan Quinn want? Does he want to keep DeMeco Ryans and Coach K, or does he want to get rid of them and pull in Jeff Ulbrich and Travis Jones? Those are questions that need to take place, and I bet you they will take place. Now, let's peel back another layer of the onion, right? So I already mentioned 3 coaches, right? Chris Richard, Travis Jones, Jeff Ulbrich, right? Well, if you look at NFL trends in the NFL and you look at coaching staff specifically, same coaches follow each other. No matter where they go, the same coaches always follow each other. Go look on right now. I challenge you. Go look at the NFL stats around the NFL, and then look at how many coaches worked with each other. The offensive coordinator has his guys. The defensive coordinator has his guys. The head coach has his guys. They all follow each other. It's just the way it is. It's the way it is. Look at it. You guys know what I'm talking about. It is what it is. It's the nature of the beast. All right. Same coaches follow each other. The bond. What I want to say is the bond is stronger even with former players who become head coaches. What I mean by that is, again, let's connect the dots here, right? I'm already connecting dots with Jeff Ulbrich, tying in to Jeff Ulbrich, to Dan Quinn, to Travis Jones, to Chris Richard, their ties in Seattle. Let's peel back and this is really dig down deep, right? Let's talk about players now, right? We're talking about players on players. Here we go. You want to take it back in time? BEASTwriter going to give it to you. All right. Let's look at Lance Schulters. Lance Schulters is Atlanta Falcons defensive assistant. He's Atlanta Falcons DA. All right. Now, Lance Schulters was one of my favorite players growing up. He was a hard hitter. Before there was Dante Whitner and Deshaun Goldson, it was Lance Schulters and Zach Bronson. Those guys brought the wood. If you remember playing Madden all these years, there was a game on Madden on the PS. Only it was PS2. It was the regular PS PlayStation. And in the highlights, you can clearly see, 1, Terrell Owens making the catch, 2, or the redemption reception, whatever you want to call it. But 2, in that Madden highlight, you also see Zach Bronson laying the wood on a Saints wide receiver. I forgot who the receiver was. It wasn't Lance Moore. Maybe it was Lance Moore. I don't know. It was a guy. He just totally laid him out and took off his helmet. It would have been a legal play this year, but yeah, Zach Bronson, Lance Schulters, they brought the wood. Speaking of the New Orleans Saints, I remember at the game at Candlestick where Lance Schulters got a pick six, sealed the win for San Francisco at Candlestick Park, and that was a game that I will always remember by Lance Schulters. Yeah, hard-hitting safety, was a ball hawk, and he made a couple Pro Bowls in his career. All right, so Lance Schulters. Why bring up Lance Schulters? Okay, he's a defense assistant for the Atlanta Falcons, played for the 49ers. Okay, so what? What are you getting at, bro? This is what I'm getting at. Again, same coaches follow each other. Jeff Ulbrich played for Dan Quinn, which I just pointed out, okay, in San Francisco 49ers. Lance Schulters played alongside Jeff Ulbrich with the San Francisco 49ers. Furthermore, Dan Quinn coached Lance Schulters at Hofstra. That's right. Dan Quinn coached Lance Schulters at Hofstra. So who do you think he wants? Come on, it goes back to Hofstra, bro. Hofstra. Just saying. And Hofstra doesn't even exist anymore. Giovanni Carmazzi, sorry, bro. That program is all over. There's no Hofstra University anymore. It's all but gone. The program was wiped out. Boom, done. But again, those Hofstra guys, they like to stick together. And don't be surprised if Dan Quinn brings over Lance Schulters in some kind of role. Especially if Raheem Morris doesn't retain Lance Schulters in some kind of role. As he'll be free and on the chopping block to be a free agent as a coach and can kind of go in with the San Francisco 49ers, slide right in, and everything comes full circle. How do you guys like that? All right. Well, that's it. When you connect the dots, the proof is in the pudding. When the time comes and Saleh leaves, do not fret, 49er fans, because Kyle Shanahan has you covered, as he already has his guy, and that guy is ultimately going to be Dan Quinn. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in to today's podcast. I hope you liked what I had to offer. If you did, please hit the subscribe button in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, as I keep all things Beast. Also, I have included in the description of this podcast some relatable podcasts, so you can kind of go ahead and look at earlier podcasts that I made, so you can stay up to date on my Twitter, YouTube receipts, so you can kind of cross-check my analysis on what I said before it happened, and then you'd be like, oh yeah, he was right, or yeah, he was wrong. I'm not wrong very much, but if I am wrong, then so be it. But yeah, that's why I put it out there for you. All right. That's why you guys follow me, because I'm more right than wrong. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in again. Have a good night. BEASTwriter out.